Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call, the last one for July. I'm glad to have you. Looks like we're going to have a strong turnout today, and we can understand given how important all the forbearance issues are. We are going to do we're going to spend a little bit of the call just doing a quick thing on certification update. Of course, probably everybody's read my note from yesterday. I have a tiny bit more to say about it, but there's nothing profoundly new. And then we'll get into legislative updates, Melody's work, and really valuable opportunities here, which I think we really need to have a breakthrough, and we've been knocking on every door and continue to do this. So this is going to be very important about what funding looks like going forward. Most of the call will be spent on forbearance. We're having Kelly Cochran back from FinReg Lab to walk us through some of the credit issues and how they impact our clients, and Alys Cohen from National Consumer Law Center. And Alys, of course, is one of the leading housing advocates in the country and has had a huge impact on legislation and deep understanding around foreclosure issues and other servicing and mortgage issues, and to talk about where things stand on forbearance and what we're trying to figure, what she and her team are working on with others to get stronger protections as well. And we're going to have two counselors, so that's always good, who are in the field and talking about what they're seeing, and hopefully there'll be a dialogue with with everybody around if there are extra things we can do or things we can learn from all this. And it's Rosie Papazian from New Economics for Women and Sue Stevenson from Parkview Services. We'll do our usual NHRC membership plug, and I just got to say, I'm just impressed with how much people are, new organizations are still joining in the current environment where we know everybody's stretched, and we really appreciate that lots and lots of groups have renewed and renewed on time, and a couple of you renewed early. Thank you so much. So we'll talk very briefly about that, and then our next call on the 13th. So with that, let's turn it over to certification. And I think to just summarize it, it seems very clear that we will not have an extension come August 1st, which of course is Saturday. It means that after that point, if you're not a certified counselor, you're not allowed to deliver those services, and you are not allowed to, and we would not be able to bill for those services under the HUD contract. We have asked HUD for a variety of clarifications and some guidance on questions like what can non-certified staff members do. So shouldn't they be able to pull credit reports? How about client intakes where you're really just taking the information in and not providing the counseling service? And could those be potentially billable under the contract if your organization has people who have passed the test? And so there was a whole outline of those that we put into the email that went out yesterday. And I just put in another note to HUD just before this call, really asking them if they could provide some written guidance on these questions before Saturday. You know, it's where things stand in terms of will we get an extension sometime in the future? Well, there's going to be a gap, and that's going to be a painful one. And if we do get an extension, one of the questions we asked is, if you get an extension, services that were delivered between August 1 and the extension date, could those then be retroactively billed under contracts? And so all these things we know mean a lot to organizations, and we have not had answers to these questions at this point. Where things stand is that it's clear to us that it's still, there's active engagement around getting certification extended, getting the deadline extended. And the way it's playing out is, HUD generally does not tell us what's going on. They feel like it's and it's not information to be shared with people outside of the government. On the other hand, they have been fairly candid with Senator Tina Smith's office, who wrote the last letter calling for an extension. And there they said that there are two paths to getting the extension that they're working on. One is the going through OMB, which is the path that we thought they would use when we first started this all back in March. And they are continuing to try to make that one work. I can't tell you what the particular problem is that's not gotten them to OMB yet. And then, but they said a second path would be a legislative solution. And as I'm sure you know, if you've been following this, we have been working closely with Representative Maxine Waters' office, who's just been excellent. And they drafted up an amendment that could be put onto the FY 2021 appropriations bill, and that would provide the extension for the funding in that particular bill. So that would be the 2021 appropriations, and that would be the 2021 appropriations year. So technically that would only start October 1 in 2020, but in reality, there's almost no chance that a budget will be passed until after the election. And so it's probably December when we'll get a budget. And assuming that it's included in there with the language, then it would apply. So, you know, obviously, no matter what, under that system, there's a gap. We are also moving in the Senate the same language, and Melody and I, Melody's lined up meetings with the key appropriators and authorizers actually tomorrow. We've given them language, and Representative Waters' staff has given them language, the same language. And the idea is to get it into certainly in the FY21 appropriations, but also to try to get it into the any COVID-19 legislation that passes. So the hurdles there are that we would need to get money for housing counseling in that bill, so it's not in there currently. So the Republican version is the only one that's public. Well, that's not true, but in the Republican version, we're not included. The House version is the HEROES bill, which got to the Senate, but has not been moved on, but they had $100 million there, and then there's a Senate proposed bill from the Democrats for $700 million for our COVID-19 counseling work, and if anything happens in between all those, that language could be attached to that. The advantage to this is that if we get in, that it could potentially become law and effective much sooner. So the goal was to get this bill passed by August 7th, which means that it has to pass the Senate and the House. Well, they all have to agree, and they're really having a hard time getting close to any kind of agreement. But if everything aligned and they got it done by August 7th, goes to the White House for signature, then this would be included in this. Then we would have an extension. But those funds, as I understand it, would only apply to the funds in the COVID-19 allocation. So it wouldn't apply to the 2021 HUD housing counseling funding. So we'll talk with the appropriators about if there's any way to kind of get our arms around that issue, but that would be, so as you can see, all of this is a little complicated. It's absolutely better than nothing, but none of it is ideal. The other two things I'm going to mention quickly, well, obviously we will continue pressing HUD, and I think they have heard you loud and clear. It has mattered a lot, the emails that individuals have written that have gone to HUD, and that becomes part of of what people are alerted to. Obviously, the House and Senate letters were helpful. There's a lot that's gone on. We don't need to go through the list, but we will keep that pressure on. But there's two other important work streams that we're initiating, and those are both designed really to get us beyond this place. So the first one is a working group. We've got over 40 of you all signed up for it already, and it's to figure out what we can do over the next few weeks and months to get a lot more people over the finish line. So whether it's an extension or not, we still need to get more of the existing counselors passed on the test. And so part of it will be an examination of the test itself. And as we've talked about before, there's a growing critique about problems in the test and things that make it harder to pass, and trying to have better clarity, higher quality questions. So that's one set of issues. There's a second set of issues around the logistics around the test and trying to solve those. So the virtual exam is very difficult to get the equipment just right, and so we know that groups have continued to struggle with that. The testing sites are few and far between right now, and very few slots available. So there's no capacity to get large numbers of people through on the site-based testing. So trying to think about what we can propose to HUD to get those things fixed. They're all contractors with HUD. And then there's the question about language and the disadvantage that people who are English as their second language, problems with the Spanish translation. So seeing if we can get that to be specific enough that we can make some proposals there. And then the broader, how can we support the counselors going through the system? And as we've alerted, several of you have raised, there's an ongoing problem of existing counselors who are very experienced, who have taken the test several times but not passed it, and trying to figure out what we can do to get people with deep experience in the field to get that better translated into the test. So so that's one work stream, is to improve on how we're getting people tested and how to train and how to test. And a second work stream is this idea that we have had working with Housing Action Illinois especially, but with many of the training organizations, to make housing counseling a career path option, and really reach out to a number of places where we might be able to recruit people based on the mission of being a housing counselor, recruit to diverse populations by race, ethnicity, but also age, and lots of other factors that we hope will augment the field. If we get the COVID-19 funding in place, there'll be a need to add more staff, and the idea would be people come into the training with the initial training will be to get people to pass the test, similar to what you would do if you were going to be a mortgage broker. You have to pass the test before you can get a job. And the idea would be, let's try to recruit around that, get people into an intensive training on that program and get them through. That is a longer term program, and we were months away from getting our first cohort there, but it's a second stream to try to make sure we're keeping the ranks strong for counselors. So that's it in a nutshell. Appreciate a lot of the correspondence we've gotten from many of you. Completely hear the frustration and anxiety, and we are going to do everything we can to help people get through this. In a world where there's lots of demands made on housing counselors, where it's lots of challenging work, this adds one layer of challenge to our work, and we really appreciate that people are sticking to it and staying with it. So with that, let's move on to what's happening in Congress. Melody?
Hello, everyone. I won't be redundant. I think Bruce had an excellent and detailed explanation of a lot of the work we're doing in Congress. The focus has largely been, obviously, including housing counseling in the Phase 4 stimulus funding, and also a lot of work around certification, ensuring that we can work with Congress to have some kind of certification language to help counselors in the bill. So just being very quick with this and going through it, the HEROES Act, which passed the House, included $100 million for housing counseling. The HEALS Act, which is the negotiated deal between the White House and Senate GOP leadership, had virtually no provisions for housing at all, and it had zero provisions for housing counseling. So there is no housing counseling funds in the Senate Republican bill. However, we think it's just one of those kind of bills that sort of appease the public and their constituents, and the real work will come following that and negotiation. So the Senate chamber is going to start debating this bill shortly and including a lot of the provisions that were in the HEROES Act for some sort of reconciled legislation. The problem we will have going forward is ensuring that key Republicans, at the very least, aren't hostile to housing counseling if they can't be supportive. And secondly, seeing the final number they're going to come up with. Because the Senate Republican bill was $1 trillion, it was very unlikely they were going to have funds for much else, because it's 1/3 the amount of the HEROES Act, which was $3 trillion. But we're actively working with our partners in Congress. We feel pretty good for our Democratic champions, Representatives Price, Chairwoman Maxine Waters, Senator Brown, a few others. So we feel good there, but it will come down to Republican leadership. Next slide. Thank you. The House THUD Appropriations bill was for $75 million. That's currently on the floor pursuant to a rule to be debated and hopefully passed. Maxine Waters, as Bruce said, there was an amendment essentially saying that the certification rule would not apply for those who receive these funds. Basically, and as Bruce said, we don't know if that's going to be included in the legislation. We hope so. We're optimistic. She's been a really good champion to a lot of our work, and that would really help a lot of counselors. But back to the Senate, which is where, if you will, the fight's really taking place around funding, whether that's appropriations or if it's COVID-19 funding. We're really trying to connect with banking GOP as well as appropriations GOP to just really learn more about housing counseling and how critical it will be. We think there's a unfortunate but necessary window of opportunity, given that we anticipate an avalanche. I think a flood isn't even fitting anymore. A Cat 5 of evictions and foreclosures if something does not move soon. And so I'm going to call out the list of Republicans that we are reaching out to. And if you have any connections with them whatsoever, or if you would just like to be on the call with them and make your case for what's happening on the ground, please email me. My email address will be at the end of the webinar, but to read it off again, it's M as in Mary, IMOH @hsgcenter.org. And so the senators we're really trying to connect with that are key players in this conversation are Senator Roberts from Kansas, as well as his colleague, Senator Moran, also from Kansas, Senator Susan Collins from Maine, who is also the Senate THUD chairwoman in appropriations, Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri, who is also on appropriations, Senator Rob Portman from Ohio, who is on banking, Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, Senator Rounds from South Dakota, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith from Mississippi, who we had a good conversation with earlier today, Senator Moore Capito from West Virginia, who is also on THUD Appropriations, Senator Todd Young, who is one of the biggest affordable housing champions on the Republican side in the Senate. And we try to have conversations with him many times. It's been somewhat difficult. So if you are from Indiana, we would love to connect with you. Senator Ernst from Iowa, Senator Daines from Montana, Senator Sullivan from Alaska, Senator Hoeven from North Dakota, Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, who is also very popular. And Florida is a key state for so many reasons politically. If you have any connections in Florida, we would love to connect. Senator Boozman from Arkansas, who also sits on Senate THUD Appropriations. Senator Gardner from Colorado, Senator Hawley from Missouri, colleague to Senator Todd Young. Senator McSally from Arizona, key player on banking. Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, also a key player on banking. Senator Mitt Romney, who is a celebrity of sorts in the Senate for more reasons than one. We would really like to connect with him because he seems to have the respect of many of his colleagues, and they do try to work with him. And Senator Fisher from Nebraska. So if you are a constituent of any of those senators, please reach out to me. Again, my email is at the end of the presentation. As Bruce said, we're likely going to have a CR this year, but that's no reason to not try to make our case for housing counseling. Our profile is rising on the Hill, but it has to be seen as a priority. And unfortunately, if we don't have a multitude of senators across the aisle speaking to the value and importance of housing counseling, and they're not championing it for their state, especially in these key committees, banking and appropriations, it's very, very unlikely that housing counseling be seen as a priority in negotiations. So the fight is not over. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you would like to help with advocacy. Thank you.
Absolutely. And if you could just send out that list, Melody, that would be great for the after the call. Well, I mean, actually, at this moment, reaching out to any of your senators would be really helpful. And the message is going to be include housing counseling in the COVID-19 legislation. And getting us in on any level will be valuable. So you can just add in what you're seeing in the field in a sentence or two, but shooting emails to your contacts or calling in, both of those would be valuable right now. Obviously, there's lots of other important things. Getting a subsidy for people on rent is the real solution for renters, as many of you know. Hopefully that will be part of this. Well, Republicans are recognizing that has to be part of the solution. There's also some initiatives to help homeowners, which are targeted. That seems to be quite helpful as well. But a lot of important things riding in this bill. Good. Well, thank you so much. Let's move on to our main topic on the issues around forbearance. So let me hand it over to Ellie.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody. So we have Kelly Cochran, the Deputy Director of FinReg Lab. She was on about a month ago and gave us a lot of really great information about the credit reporting issues, and she's going to update us on recent things that they've learned and some things to be paying attention to. Kelly.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. It's great to talk with everyone again. We've just released an updated report and can probably send that around after the presentation. Just updating various issues with regard to how pandemic-related information is being reflected in consumer reports, how it's affecting credit scores, and then how it's being used by lenders. So I'll just kind of briefly give you an overview and then turn to Alys for more detailed information about kind of the broader mortgage context. So if you can advance to the next slide, slide 3. I'm not going to talk through this one. This is stuff that we covered last time, but as a reminder, there are some special comment codes that are often used to reflect that a consumer has been impacted by a disaster. And the CARES Act in March put certain additional requirements in place for credit reporting in connection with accommodations. So that could be a forbearance, deferrals, various other types of structures where a consumer reaches out to a lender or servicer and obtains some sort of relief in connection with the pandemic. Next slide. So since we talked last, there have been continuing issues in this space, and in fact, credit reporting seems more important than ever. The CFPB just put out an update on complaints coming out of its database, and it shows that while mortgage complaints were really high in March and April in connection with COVID-19, credit reporting replaced them in May as the single largest category of COVID-19 related complaints. And more generally, mortgage complaints seem to have dropped back down to levels that were more similar to what was happening before the pandemic, but credit reporting complaints continue to go up. They were going up well into the middle of June even, based on the most recent data available. One recent development on this in particular has involved Wells Fargo. We had heard prior to our last presentation that there were concerns that servicers were putting forbearance codes on consumers' reports when in fact they were not in forbearance. And it was anecdotal and hard to tell how often this was happening. There have been a couple of recent reports suggesting that Wells Fargo in particular has done this, and that it's not just a question of putting the codes on their consumer reports, but that whatever they're doing in their system is actually affecting the way that payments are being processed. So if a consumer did not in fact want a forbearance and is continuing to try to make payments, those payments may not be being processed properly by Wells Fargo. So that's an increasing concern, and I believe there was a congressional letter sent to them even maybe this morning about this topic. More generally, we know from industry reports that about 25% of homeowners with forbearances on their reports are in fact still making payments in June. That's down from about 46% in April, but that's still really substantial. Now, some of those people may not have intended to go into forbearance at all. Some of them may have wanted a forbearance, but then later realized that they could in fact continue to pay and wanted to do that so that they didn't have to make up payments later. The CFPB recently issued some FAQs emphasizing that servicers should not be using forbearance codes if there is not actually a plan in place. And consumers can use the normal credit report dispute process to get those codes removed if they shouldn't actually be there. In terms of CARES Act implementation more generally, a couple of facts here. We have heard some anecdotal reports of kind of report errors and problems in implementing what the CARES Act says to do. But more generally, the big news there may be just that apparently from industry numbers, only about 40% of homeowners who were past due before the pandemic actually obtained forbearances, compared to about 90% of the homeowners who have gone past due since the pandemic struck. So there are a number of people who are still kind of going through loss mitigation, delinquency, other issues, who did not in fact get forbearances in connection with the CARES Act. So that means that they're also not getting any of the credit reporting protections that apply because of the CARES Act. So that's a significant number and something that I think people are really starting to focus on. Next slide. And then just as a reminder why this matters, FICO scores don't actually change based on whether there is a disaster code or a forbearance code in place. VantageScore announced in May that it was actually adjusting its models to minimize the potential that there would be negative effects from some of those codes being on consumers' reports. More generally, the big question here is, in the short term, is about how this potentially affects consumers' ability to get refinancing. Traditionally, the GSEs and FHA have generally required 12 months of full current payments prior to a new loan. In May, the GSEs changed their requirements to make it easier for consumers who have had recent forbearances to get refinances, and the slide lays out the specific categories where that can happen. Although that has helped a great deal in terms of clarifying that these new refinance loans can be securitized, there is still a concern that lenders are tightening their criteria, and they may be either pricing differently or rejecting some loans because they're worried that the loans might go into forbearance before they could be securitized or insured by FHA, and they're concerned about financial ramifications of that happening. So there's still a concern that refinancing may be difficult to obtain right now for consumers where that might be the best option. Next slide. The other big news is just that we are starting to see a transition away from the short-term forbearances into kind of what comes next for consumers. There are various reports from TransUnion, Black Knight, and then the MBA about how many loans are in forbearance. They have slightly different numbers, but all three of those sources agree that the number of forbearances did start to decline in June. They have slightly different percentages as to how much. This is just one example, but you can see kind of a drop. Interestingly, some of the reports that are the most granular, that go week by week, seem to suggest that the amount of decline in forbearance has started to slow down in July. That may be an impact of kind of additional economic hardship. We're not sure. We don't have a lot of information on that yet, but we know that that is a concern. So that raises a number of questions: is as the forbearance ends, what comes next? If you can go to the next slide. So there's a number of developments on this front when it comes to the kind of next step question. The first is that there's been new credit reporting guidance issued by the industry group that oversees the Metro 2 data standards on reporting different types of repayment plans. So this was only issued about 2 weeks ago. People are still digesting it, but it was a really large concern that we had mentioned last time, that we were hearing a lot of concern about how are these different options going to be reported, how will they show up on consumers' reports. So people are still digesting. I think there are some questions being raised, again, with regard to special comment codes. In this case, we're not talking about the kind of disaster code or the forbearance code, but some of the codes that are used with longer term restructures. The new guidance says that when it comes to GSE repayment options, generally speaking, special comment codes shouldn't be used unless there is a full-on loan modification, that it's really changing the terms of the contract, and then that you would see a CO code. That isn't factored into either FICO or VantageScore, so that code should not make a difference in scores. The general guidance that's in this industry information is more broad. It can apply to mortgages, other mortgages, and other categories of credit altogether. There it simply says leave the special comment code blank or use the appropriate code, but it doesn't go through and explain to people what the appropriate code is. There is some concern that we've heard from some stakeholders about the use of an AC code, which is called, it means paying under a partial agreement. It's often used in trial mods in the mortgage industry, and it is treated as a negative code by FICO, although it's not factored in by VantageScore. So there's some concern and kind of follow-up about that issue. I'm still waiting to see kind of how that plays out. More broadly, beyond the question of consumers who are going from a short-term forbearance immediately into a longer-term repayment plan of some form, there are other questions about what happens if that transition isn't immediate. The consumer obviously has not been making payments in most cases, and so the question is sort of like, what happens? How do they get reported? How is the delinquency treated, both for purposes of credit reporting and more generally for things like loss mitigation? So that's a growing area of interest and concern. The CFPB's FAQs from June do emphasize that a consumer, you shouldn't go backwards in time and report a consumer as being delinquent for months that they were in a forbearance and complying with the terms of the forbearance. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's answered all the questions about once the forbearance has ended, if the consumer doesn't transition into a repayment plan right away, how does the kind of accounting work at that point? And so we're continuing to hear people press for more guidance on that question. We'll see where that goes. And then, as I said, there's a number of other broader questions about how do things work more generally with regard to forbearances under the CARES Act, loan servicing requirements, and so on. So I will turn to Alys for that kind of the broader mortgage context, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Great, thanks so much, Kelly. Yeah, we will go to questions at the end of the presentation. So we'll move, and there's Kelly's information, everybody. So I will tell you, Kelly is very responsive, and so you can feel free to email her if you have questions. And we'll move on to Alys Cohen, who's the staff attorney at National Consumer Law Center. Alys has been on before, and she always does a great job of explaining complicated issues. So Alys, take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me, and really thanks to everyone who's here today, because you're the ones working every day with homeowners and trying to save homes. And that's why we're all here in Washington doing the work, is to serve you. So thank you. I looked at the Washington Post shortly before we were starting earlier today, and one of the things I saw was the headline about John Lewis's funeral, of course, and I just want to be mindful of the fact that this is a disaster for the whole country, but it's a much bigger disaster for certain populations, and that includes people of color, particularly Black and Latinx homeowners. And we're very, very concerned about a disparate impact of the upcoming foreclosure crisis. And John Lewis would say, you know, negotiate inside the room, organize outside the room. And I think as a community, we're doing all of that. The other thing that was very noticeable is the second headline on the Washington Post that says, the U.S. economy suffers historic contraction as the virus hits jobs and businesses. And so our work is really just beginning, and it's going to be a pretty long process, I think. Kelly went through some of the data from Black Knight. I was going to share a little more information about data and then talk about the kinds of protections we've already gotten and some thoughts about those and the kinds of protections we don't already have. So first, Ellie put up this chart so we can look at this chart first. There's a survey that the Census Bureau is doing where they're asking households questions about whether they can pay certain types of bills or not. And one of those types of bills is their mortgage payment. And the question that they asked was about whether you're making your payment, whether you're expecting to make your payment. And in the first quarter of 2020, we were already starting with a situation where the Black homeownership rate, for example, is 44%, and the white homeownership rate is 74%. And in week 9 of this particular census survey, the Household Pulse survey, 17% of Black homeowners and 8% of Hispanic or Latino homeowners reported missing a payment, a mortgage payment in May, but only 4% of white homeowners reported that. And those are much higher numbers than the percentage of people who reported that they had made arrangements with their servicer, meaning they might have a forbearance. So here you can see on the chart on the left-hand side that, you know, Black borrowers were 4 times more likely to say they missed a payment than they had a forbearance. And Latino or Hispanic borrowers and other multiracial borrowers were about twice as likely. So we don't have to look at this chart the whole time. Ellie, if you want to put something else up for us to all look at while I'm talking, that's fine with me. What's interesting and concerning about that chart is many more people are saying they're not getting help and are just not paying rather than getting a forbearance. Now that stands a little bit in contrast with the data that Kelly showed. Black Knight said that for people who became delinquent after the national emergency for COVID, 90% of people were in forbearances rather than just missing a payment. But for people who were already late when the COVID emergency started, only 40% of them were in forbearances. And so that may be part of the explanation. What we don't have in the data that they're sharing is also that we don't know how different communities are being hit, different, you know, income levels, different racial groups, different geographic areas. The chart from Black Knight also says that 28% of the loans in active forbearance were actually making payments, you know, in about the 3rd week of May. So there's a lot we don't know, and the stuff that we do know is in some ways raising a lot of questions about what else we need to know. But one thing we know is that a lot of people are really suffering, and that the foreclosure moratoria for government-backed loans is ending at the end of August. And people who got forbearances in March mostly got 3-month forbearances that expired in June. And so we're just starting to learn more about whether people got extensions, whether they got extensions even if they didn't have a government-backed loan, for example, because the CARES Act only provides protections for government-backed loans. And for people who have government-backed loans, for the most part, did they need extensions for their forbearance? And Kelly, has raised some interesting questions in some discussions we've had about the up and down of the economic situation. So some people went back to work and now they're out of work again. Can they get back into their forbearance? Is it considered a new forbearance? Is it a continuation of their old forbearance? What if they made payments but they stayed in the forbearance? Does it get extended? So those are things we're trying to learn more about, and it's not totally clear what the official policies are or what the servicers are actually doing. We haven't gotten any indication so far that if you have, for example, a 6-month forbearance and you make 2 payments, we don't have any indication that the end of your forbearance gets extended in any way. Just that the amount that you owe at the end of the forbearance is less because you made some payments. So it's not clear whether you actually get 12 months of non-payment or you just get a period of 12 months during which you can miss payments if you need to, and then after that, you're done. So those are things we're still trying to get answers to. We tried to get some more answers from Fannie and Freddie about a month ago, and they didn't get back to us, and I just pinged them again today to see if we could learn a little bit more. In terms of where we are right now with the kinds of protections that we have, one thing that's notable is we have these forbearance protections. They're only for government-backed loans. It's supposed to be up to 12 months of forbearance in smaller increments, a set of increments up to 180 days, and then it appears you need to ask for more and get another set of 180 days. But within that 180 days, you may have to ask for more, or it may be automatically extended depending on who you're dealing with. And those are just the government-backed loans. For the private loans, portfolio loans, loans that are securitized on Wall Street through the private label securities market, those are loans that have been mimicking the policies of the federal loans, but a lot of those companies said they weren't going past 3 months. Later in the Q&A, I'll be interested in hearing what you're actually seeing about different kinds of loans. But even though the forbearance is out there, there is no requirement, as you probably know, to tell homeowners in a letter that they have the right to a forbearance. So a lot of people don't know about it, as Ellie demonstrated in the survey that she did with all of you. Later, I'll talk about the provisions we are trying to get, and we are trying to fix that. Forbearances are only available if you ask for them. There aren't automatic forbearances, and I'll also talk about that in a little while. And obviously, there are only forbearances for government-backed loans, not for private loans. The other thing that we don't really have is any official system on what happens after a forbearance. For example, what you get afterwards. Now, because forbearances in the CARES Act are only for government-backed loans, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA, etc., all have policies for what you can be offered afterwards. But if you have a private label loan, there are no rules for lump sum repayment or whether you can get an affordable loan modification or repayment plan of some sort. And so that's still really up to the servicer and the investor, unfortunately. FHA and Fannie and Freddie have rolled out new
Alys, we're not hearing you.
Yeah, we just lost Alys here.
Just lost Alys, yeah.
And it might be that she's on mute, we're hoping. Alys, can you hear us?
It's saying she's offline. She might just have an internet disconnection brief. Let's just give her a moment.
Okay, all right. Oh, and Alys, are you there?
She's not. She's still showing offline.
Okay. So let's, should we maybe pivot to the counselors and talk with them a bit while she's getting back on?
Sure.
So we have two housing counselors on the call who have been, for months sending me information about what they are hearing from their clients and issues that they're having around forbearance and trying to get loss mitigation. So I invited them to come on to talk with us a little bit about this so that we could hear from them, and also Alys and Kelly could hear from them and maybe interact on what they're hearing. So Rosie, we're going to start with you. Are you there? Oh, go ahead, Rosie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yay.
great. Hi, good morning. So the bulk of my issues has been with privately held loans, not so much FHA borrowers. And right now I have two cases that have been really challenging to try to assist the homeowner because they're both privately held loans and they get conflicting information depending on the representative they get on that day. So one is with Faye, the other one is with Rushmore. The client with Rushmore is very interesting because I've been on calls with her to her servicer. She is technically due for a mortgage payment come August 1st, but she was promised a extension on her forbearance until October, but nobody has record of this conversation. Even though we got the representative's employee ID, there was an application that was sent to her, but nobody has record of that promise on file. So she's technically now due for her August payment, although she's technically in review for additional forbearance. So that has been very frustrating to deal with. My other borrower, she's from Faye. She was told, we'll give you a forbearance, an additional forbearance for another 3 months, but you understand that, if you take this forbearance, you're going to have a balloon payment, there's just no negotiations there. And so, I understand that there are no rules, similar to what the speaker before me just mentioned. There are no rules for privately held loans, but this is just so much nonsense because there's no way that she's going to recover her income come October. So, that's really been the most frustrating part. Additionally, there was a instance. Go ahead.
Nope, you go.
There was an instance with my borrower for Rushmore where a representative kind of not threatened, but said, if you take the additional forbearance, we are going to go ahead and report you as late. So the conflicting information, the lack of just to get to any kind of resolve from the representatives is challenging. I mean, I get it. They're very overwhelmed too, but there seems to be no consistency, no real concern for the borrowers at this point. And, something that I voiced to you, Ellie, was that, they're being told, go talk to a housing counseling agency. And, there really isn't a whole lot that we can do. We can get on the phone with the servicers, but, if there's no resolve, I almost feel like my hands are tied and they're not giving me or my borrower straight answers. And I don't know who to escalate this to. We did escalate one case to the CFPB and to the client's local congressman. The congressman didn't help at all. He just said, I can't get involved in privately held mortgages. And so, and that was that. So that's what we're dealing with.
And have you had any response from the servicer as a result of your CFPB complaint?
No, not yet.
And when did you file that?
I filed that a little less than a month ago.
Okay.
Could I jump in on one issue which we've been dealing a lot with, which is this question about a balloon. And so with Fannie and Freddie loans, so I understand that that's not what you're talking about here, but with Fannie and Freddie loans, one of the solutions that they are moving forward with is this, it's called a deferral. And essentially it takes the debt that somebody owes on the forbearance payment. So let's say it's 3 months, and it takes that, puts it on the end of the loan, but it puts it on the end of the loan as a balloon. It's what we call a silent balloon. So it's a balloon that only comes due at the end of the loan, and it accumulates no interest and has no late fees. So essentially, it's just the payments. And the reason that this has been valuable is that it's not a modification. So the equivalent in the field would have been cap and extend. So extend the loan and recapitalize it. So that's a modification. That requires all the paperwork you need to redo the loan. And we all have a lot of experience with this in the foreclosure crisis, and that was a mess. With deferral, it's the same loan, and all you're doing is adding the silent balloon on the end. And the corollary, which it's different in some ways, but it's FHA has been doing this for years. And while I was like, oh my God, a balloon, on the other hand, the FHA loans, we never received complaints about people around the balloon at the end. And of course, the reason is that when it comes to when you come to the end of the loan, either you've already refinanced and then you've just included that in the refi, or you're selling the property, and that would be one more part to take that's taken out of the sale price. For a few people who get to the actual physical end of the loan, you can always refinance or choose to handle that, with a smaller loan. There's lots of ways to manage it. So we're thinking there's some balloons that are not predatory and may be a better solution. So they can't be due until you're at the end of the loan, and it should be a silent balloon that does it on the end. So I'm saying that might be a solution that would be that would work for people. And I don't know if that's specifically what they were offering in the case you were giving an example for, but that's something that I would feel okay about, as opposed to cap and extend, which is traditionally what you would have used in the situation.
To answer your question, Bruce, no, that's not what she was offered. It was a balloon payment at the end of the forbearance period. I am all for a balloon at the end of the loan. It at least gives the borrower some time to make payments towards it. But in this situation, it's very difficult to get them to agree to that.
Okay, that's nuts then. That makes no sense. So, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Bruce, Alys is back on the line, and so I'd like to allow Alys to finish up.
Okay.
And so, Alys, feel free to ask Rosie questions, too, because I know you didn't get to hear all of what she said.
My apologies, like 1 minute I was talking and the next minute I wasn't, but it took me a while to figure out how to get back on. So hopefully I'll stay on now. It's not like I'm not doing Zoom calls all day that work fine, so I apologize for that. Just to finish up the conversation about Rosie's situation there, do you know what kind of loan it was? I missed your conversation.
Sure, the one with Faye is a private investor, and then I don't have the details on that one, but like I said, they're both non-government insured.
Right, so that really demonstrates why we think it's important to have the same protections for government-backed loans and private loans, because investors and servicers for private loans are behaving very differently, and no one has a lump sum payment at the end of the forbearance. It's why they needed the forbearance. If they needed the forbearance, they don't have the money at the end of the forbearance, and it's going to be very hard to get another loan to pay that amount. What are people doing in those circumstances, and what are the outcomes looking like?
So my clients, because they want to keep the house, they're taking the extended forbearances, understanding that they have a balloon payment due in a couple of months. I have one lady who's trying her hardest to sell her possessions. It's very heartbreaking. I have one man who's looking for work at Target. It's just impossible. Let's just be real. They're not going to be able to pay that back.
So basically they got a 3-month forbearance and now they're going to lose their house because nothing's being offered them except a lump sum payment.
Correct. And again, and that was the agreement. If you want the extension, you have to agree to the balloon payment at the end of the period.
Right, but they didn't have a choice at the time.
Correct.
So their choices were start foreclosure now or start it in 3 months.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this isn't the topic for this call, but it would be great to all work together to strategize how to capture some of these stories to try to change the policies, even if we can't save every house. And that way we can try to affect the future. And so we can talk about that another time. Ellie, did you want me to go on back to my presentation, or did you want Rosie and Sue to finish?
No, go ahead and go back to your presentation.
Okay. Again, my apologies for getting cut off. I'll try to finish up pretty quickly. So Bruce and Rosie were just having that back and forth about lump sums versus deferrals and, deferral repayment when you can essentially keep your payment as it is. So that's why we're trying to get the whole market covered. One of the things that we noticed was that escrow isn't totally taken care of even when you can resume your regular payment. So if you get a deferral from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the servicer advanced some of your escrow payments, your tax and insurance payments to the local authorities or the insurance company, that money that they already paid, you can kind of roll into your balloon payment at the end of your loan. But if there's money that you were supposed to pay into your escrow, but it hasn't already been advanced, that's called an escrow shortage. That's money that you still owe the servicer that can't get rolled into your deferral. And so even though the deferral is set up as a system where you resume your regular payments and then you owe everything else at the end, in fact, you're going to have an increase in your monthly payment because you have to pay back the escrow shortage over some period of time. So I don't know if anyone has been seeing that. It would be interesting to hear more about that at the end, but we're concerned that people are going to face increases in their monthly payments due to the escrow, but they're going to be told, as long as you can resume your regular payment, we can just put you in this plan here. So we're a little worried about that. We're also really worried about people who can't resume their regular payments. And so they're going to need to apply for loss mitigation at the end of a forbearance. Those people are probably still trying to extend forbearances if they can. If they're going to end up with a lump sum, then they probably aren't going to be able to get a loss mitigation option. But even if it's a Fannie or a Freddie loan or an FHA loan, people are going to need payment reductions if they're not back to their previous income levels. And we're worried about how many people are going to need that. How easy is it going to be to get that? Are those options going to be affordable? So those are more things that we'll be looking at. One thing I really want to make everyone aware of is this. The CFPB rules say that somebody has to be 120 days delinquent before a foreclosure can start. But if someone gets a forbearance, that doesn't stop that 120-day clock. And so if you're in forbearance for 4 months, technically the servicer can start foreclosure right at the end of that, even while the person's trying to figure out what other plan they're going to be in. Now, if they extend the forbearance, then that whole problem will get extended further if there's no gap. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac told us that their policy is that if someone is in a foreclosure, in a forbearance, and they're trying to get a deferral, or they haven't done anything, that the servicer should send the deferral option of resuming your regular payment, and only after they haven't responded to that would they start the foreclosure. But it's unclear what's happening in real life with those loans, and it's unclear what's happening with other types of loans. And we're trying to get the CFPB to say the 120 days doesn't tick on while you're in a forbearance, but so far we haven't won on that yet. And we're also trying to get Congress to fix that. A big conversation that everyone's been having, including at NHRC and here in Washington, is about auto forbearances. And I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on that. And then we can turn it over and talk about whatever else you guys want to talk about. Oh, and I'll say one more thing about notice also. So the reason people started talking about automatic forbearance was for people who don't have a housing counselor or a lawyer, people who aren't in touch with their servicer. For those people who aren't making payments and aren't seeking assistance, their delinquency is just going to march on, and then they're just going to end up in foreclosure as soon as these foreclosure moratoria end. And so the thinking about an auto forbearance at 60 days is, it's hard to imagine that it hurts you to get a forbearance at 60 days if you're not in touch with your servicer, you're not getting any help, and your delinquency is just going to march on. We would prefer if people were reaching out, we would prefer if people are getting help, but if they're not, we don't want them to be in foreclosure before they have the option of getting into a forbearance and working out a longer term system. Even if they get a forbearance, they're going to have to talk to their servicer and potentially get help before extending it, and certainly before getting any post forbearance option. But that's why that conversation has come up. The other thing is that we're trying to get notices, but there are already notices on a lot of company websites. But the inspector generals for both FHA and for FHFA, the regulator of Fannie and Freddie, have found that most websites have either incomplete or wrong information. And so your clients, even if they're going on the websites for the servicers, they may come in with the wrong impression about what's going on because the wrong information is on those websites. So just be aware of that as well. So that's the main stuff I was thinking of going through. I'm interested in hearing what questions or thoughts people have, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Alys. And you know, Alys is referring to, a couple of times referred to the survey that NHRC did, where many of you answered about what you're hearing from your consumers about about whether or not they're late and why they're late, and you know, are you seeing renters and so on. And I'll tell you that advocates and regulators are very eager to hear what you all have to say about what you're seeing from your clients. I've spoken about this survey several times on different calls, and it actually has been referenced in a letter sent from the House Oversight Committee on the CARES Act. So what you all are seeing on the ground is important, and people are interested in hearing about it. We might be putting forward a new survey to kind of get at some updated information, because as a result of us talking about this in the community and among our stakeholders, there's more information that that's being asked for that we think we can get from you. So if you see that, please know that your thoughts and your answers are being paid attention to and are being sought. And one of the things that we asked in that survey was around whether or not you all thought it was a good idea to have an automatic forbearance program when homeowners were 30 days delinquent. So a pretty large number of you said no, but what I read and what we have been telling our stakeholders is that it isn't about the issue with the automatic forbearance as much as it is an issue with housing counselors really being concerned, because of so much past experience with servicers, that servicers will somehow take advantage of it and not really properly work with homeowners the way that they should. So I'm happy to, I would love to hear if there's any more thoughts, if people want to put things in the chat box or, you know, in the question box about what your thoughts are about an automated forbearance at 60 days. But I think Alys makes a really good point that this is really the people who aren't reaching out to you, who are out there and don't know what is or isn't available, and rather than going delinquent, we want to, and risking foreclosure, we want to protect them as much as possible. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rosie to see. Rosie, did you have any other story of a homeowner situation in forbearance that you wanted to raise up and talk about?
I'm so sorry, Ellie. There's construction happening near my house, so I'll be brief. No, really, that's about it. I mean, I'd like to pose a question to everybody here. If you have any contacts at either Fay or Rushmore that we can escalate these cases that have been at the top of my mind, I would really appreciate it.
So,
and I will comment that, go ahead, Bruce.
So in a previous career, that's what we did, was we developed sort of the senior manager relationships that we would appeal things that made absolutely no sense to and try to stop during the foreclosure crisis. And, it makes, so clearly what you're saying is you've got a model of a loss mitigation resolution that absolutely will not work, that will not get the investor paid back, will have people lose their house. It's kind of totally non-functional. And I think we originally got the contact information we had from Fay from the Housing Policy Council. We'll try to figure out if there's ways that they might be able to help us get somebody more senior to take a look at a case like this and try to figure out a higher level appeal, because none of this makes sense, and the people that you're dealing with are probably scripted and having no ability to do the fix. But that's the one thing that jumps out at me as a solution. But we have to find those people, and it's not always, they're pretty well insulated in many institutions.
This is Kelly. Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to address the thing about someone saying that they were going to report as late, even during the forbearance. So I just wanted to emphasize the CARES Act does not permit that. The credit reporting provisions in the CARES Act say if you get an accommodation on a credit obligation, doesn't matter if it's a federally backed mortgage or not. When it comes to the credit reporting requirements, if you have an accommodation, you are supposed to be reported as current as long as you comply with that forbearance or whatever whatever the agreement is. So that was just flat out wrong. And that provision doesn't depend on whether it's a private mortgage or federally backed. So that's definitely a piece that should be pushed back on. So just wanted to flag that.
That's a very good piece of information to have, to be clear about. And one of the things I wanted to add about escalation, so we do, as many of you know, and if you don't know, please email me and I'll make sure that you have the password to it and the link to it, but we have a servicer list with counselor contacts, and some of them also have not just housing counselor only contacts, but also escalation options. And we continue to work on getting more of those contacts. And this week I've actually made some contact with Guild Servicing, and we are really hoping, to your point, Rosie, to get something from Rushmore and Fay. And also SPS, that's another one we keep hearing a lot of issues with. So we are continuing to work on that. And so if you have the link to our housing counselor escalation list, I would encourage you to keep checking it. We have not put any new updates since June 2nd, but I anticipate that some updates are going to happen within the next couple of weeks. So if you have that link, I encourage you to keep checking it and seeing if anything's been updated. So with that, let's go to Sue Stevenson. Sue, are you there?
I am. Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Go ahead and tell us your story.
Yeah, I'll just kind of jump right in on things because I always have a lot of information that I want to share with everybody. I've been wondering about if the forbearance stops the clock when it comes to foreclosure. So Alys, thank you so much for answering that question because I'm really curious about that. One of the things that I talk about with homeowners that they think they're going to get furloughed, or they're not sure, or they're scared and they don't know, my conversation with them is that I strongly encourage them to take the forbearance, keep making their payments if they can and if they're able to, but don't throw away that forbearance just because you might not need it at this moment, or you think you're going to be back to work in a month because, like you said, people go back to work and then they get furloughed and then they're back to work a little bit again. Keep the forbearance in place. Don't throw it away. Just leave it there because it doesn't hurt anything, and they have to accept any payments that you make for them. My thought on the GSE loans.
Wait, can I just jump in on what you just said? Hi, it's Alys.
Absolutely.
Maybe it says that, I'm not sure, but so I think there's a big difference between someone who's already in a forbearance and someone who's not. So I have definitely talked to people, including friends, who said, I can make my mortgage this month. I'm worried I can't make it next month. And based on what I know today, my worry is you only get one forbearance and they won't lengthen the time even if you make payments. So what I would tell, that's what I was told so far about the policy. Now, it may be that servicers are extending the time if people are making payments, but there's nothing requiring them to do that. So that's what I was asking. If you see that servicers are extending, like if you get a 3-month forbearance and you make 2 of the payments, is the person being told, well, your forbearance doesn't end now, it ends in 2 more months? Because if it's still going to end in 3 months and the person can make payments, I wouldn't want someone to start a forbearance if they can make their payments, because as long as they can make their payments, once the forbearance starts, if it's not going to be extended, that's going to be a problem for people because they can't have it at the back end. On the other hand, if you're already in a forbearance, so far I think you don't want to end it because there's no evidence that you can automatically be given another one. Now, the servicers may offer them another one, but the law doesn't require that. I'll be quiet and listen to what your thoughts are now.
No, I agree with that. It's the people that are in the forbearance and they call me up and like, I think I'm going to go back to work and, you know, what do I do about the forbearance? Just leave it alone and let it stay there because the servicers have to accept whatever payments you do give them. And you're right. As far as we know, any information we have, once you give up that forbearance, you're not going to be able to get back into it again. One of my The GSE loans are easy. It's the privately held loans that are the problems, and SPS stands out among all of them. And that housing counselor escalations link, you know, Faye isn't on it, Rushmore isn't on it, SPS isn't on it, Carrington isn't on it. I'll rattle off a few of the examples that I have. And if anybody has any questions, just interject with me and say, hey, stop me, just like you did, Alys. I appreciate it. So my first one, her name's Anna. It's SPS. It's a private investor. She was already in a formal repayment plan that started on February 1st, 2020. She was making the monthly payments, which are double of her regular monthly mortgage payment. The repayment plan, it goes for 1 full year up to February of 2021. She called, she was speaking to the representative at SPS, just inquiring what options might be available. And the woman that spoke with Anna told her that if she entered into a COVID forbearance, that it would cancel out Anna's existing repayment plan. Anna clearly stated that she did not want to cancel her repayment plan. She didn't want the COVID forbearance and keep her existing repayment plan in place. Anna received a letter. She was going through some medical things. I think she had some kidney stones or something, so she lost a couple of documents. She's not sure where they are. But it was dated April of May, stating that she was in the COVID forbearance. And so when I had helped her with her, and this is on her first mortgage, we had gotten her a modification on her second lien, and we were getting ready to close that up, and I was getting ready to close her file out. I was just calling SPS to check in on her repayment plan to make sure everything was in place. And I was informed by the representative, who was very nice and helpful, that Anna was in a COVID forbearance that would be ending this month. And that was, it'll end this at the end of July. And advised that if Anna didn't have the money to pay back the lump sum, Anna can request an extension to the COVID forbearance in her online account. and that there's a banner that you can go to take the survey. It's supposed to be easy to find, but be very careful, because if you answer any of the questions incorrectly, you cannot go back and change anything. Nothing can be corrected on it. So to me, that's rather dangerous, because we all click the wrong box or we do something. So that one's Anna's. Jeremy and Heather, I don't know, Washington State, we have mediation. It's the Foreclosure Fairness Act, and I'll keep this very limited, but the requirement with the Foreclosure Fairness Act is that if mediation is invoked, then the requirement is they have to be reviewed for a loan modification. So Heather and Jeremy, SPS, private investor, I can name the trust if you need me to. I submitted the full modification packet on June 3rd. Asked for the status from the mediation attorneys on July 20th. And their response is that no review has taken place because they're in a forbearance. And now they say they won't review, the denial letter doesn't say anything about any of this. And now the attorney is stating that they're still currently in a forbearance. But Heather is getting text messages from SPS stating time is running out, the temporary payment relief granted to you has expired, saying it's already done. They never requested an extension when they didn't want the forbearance. And so we realized at our agency, through talking to everybody, we need to make a clean break. We need to put it in writing and state, stop the COVID forbearance. The homeowners are ready to be reviewed for loan modification. Otherwise, it's just the packet is just completely ignored and they're not being reviewed. My third one, Crystal, it's PHH, Deutsche is the investor. The denial letter had new res on it that made it extremely confusing. PHH gave Crystal 2 forbearances while they were in review, and it goes up to October 20th, 2020 right now, but the assigned foreclosure auction sale date is October 23rd. They wouldn't go further out. It was a really messy mediation. The first forbearance is dated April 27th, 2020, and it's backdated to their default date of July 1st, 2019. And they gave them an additional one while they were being reviewed for the modification, while they're in mediation, which is a big deal, and it's dated July 21st, and that's the one that ends October 20th. Now, on the call with the decision maker at PHH and the mediation attorney, the homeowner does not trust PHH at all, and PHH made it very clear that they could request extensions every 3 months, but it would be up to PHH to approve the extension. So what would make the homeowner think that when they called 2 weeks prior to the forbearance ending on October 20th and say, PHH, we'd like an extension, how many people would think that they would have any inkling whatsoever to extend that forbearance and stop that sale date from happening 3 days later? Zero. There is another one that we did have. It was another mediation file that we had, SPS, and this was a good kudos to getting it done, is that through some assertive emails that were sent to the mediation attorney stating that you're violating the CARES Act, because remember, this is not a GSE loan, but it's SPS. The email came back saying that at first it's not a GSE-backed loan, so it's not eligible for the CARES Act forbearance. And then after the strong email was sent, it came back saying SPS advises that the borrower is currently in a 90-day forbearance since July 6th, and that she may request it to be renewed every 90 days for up to 1 year. My last example that I've got is that my biggest beef right now is I'm not a time waster. I want to get things done. I want to be efficient. I don't want to be on the hamster wheel, and I don't want to waste anyone's time, regardless of who it is. I've got one where Lacey, her name's Lacey, it's Midland, and it's an FHA loan. And I submitted a complete packet, I don't know, a couple months ago. Every 1 or 2 weeks when I called to get a status update, they want another document. They made us produce her receipt for her dog food for $40 a month to prove her expenses. I know FHA likes to see your expenses, but no servicer has ever asked for anything like that before. And I've made it very clear to them the last 2 times when they have asked me for some other piddly document that I was going to have no choice, but I was going to have to escalate to HUD, the CFPB, the Attorney General, the DFI for an improper review being done. And I wanted to make sure that that person, the representative that I was speaking to, was going to check in with the person that is in charge of reviewing Lacey's file to make sure this is the very last document that they're going to request, or I'm going to have to file the complaints. And I called back the next week. They want another thing. Oh, Lacey's, and we had already been over this. Lacey did DocuSign on every single one of her documents. We had already gone through all of her documents while we were on the phone saying, no, we don't need a wet ink signature on that one. That's fine. And then so I called back last week. Oh, we need a wet ink signature on her room renter lease agreement. And we went through the whole thing all over again saying this is the very last thing that we're going to ask for. I'm afraid to call Midland for, I fear, for, I'm always nice to the representatives and I understand that they're doing their job and I tell them that, but I'm afraid to call them because I don't know how I'm going to react if I get asked for one more document. I don't have to deal with Midland very often.
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
First of all, do you guys ever deal with Matt Martin, who runs the National Servicing Center for HUD, for FHA loans? He's essentially like the person who runs the National Servicing Center, which is where you're supposed to call when you have a servicer not complying with FHA servicing requirements. So it sounds like Lacey's trying to get an FHA HAMP loan modification. Is that right?
Yes, she totally qualifies. We have the FHA workout tool. We have our own, and it matches, and we've tested it, and I know she passes it, and she should be approved by now. She should already be in it.
So I want to work with Ellie and Bruce after the call, connect them with some of my colleagues, and make sure that everyone who's part of the NHRC network has information, including Matt Martin's email address, because you should send him this example and he should fix it for you. End of story. I want to encourage people to aggressively escalate when you have tried and you can see that there's a compliance problem. When you know what the rules are and they are not following the rules, yes, you can be polite to the person from the servicer and that person may be doing their job, but the servicer, the company, is not doing their job. And you should escalate to get your client what they need, and then we should start documenting the stuff so we can fix it. On the specific issue of documenting the expenses, we have been working with FHA for 4 years to try to solve this problem since they put out Mortgagee Letter 2016-14 creating this problem. And HUD recently made proposals to fix this problem. And so they shouldn't be asking for that level of information. And when they are, you should also escalate to Matt Martin. So we can talk more about it offline, but I just wanted to put that out there for everybody.
I appreciate that. If there's anything that you could also do or have, Carrington is, I only have one file right now. In my opinion, Carrington is the most difficult servicer to get a review from. And a mediation attorney told me one day, well, I had a file that was just, it went on for, I think, 9 months. And this was mediation, where mediation means that no other communication worked. They got a notice of default. We invoked mediation. Now we have a direct communication, and we all the communication goes through the mediation email string. And an attorney told me one day that Carrington dumps their bucket every month if they're missing one document. So you have to start all over again. So you can never, ever, ever get a complete packet to Carrington and get a review. It's a VA loan. And this is a veteran widow.
So is this, are the issues with Carrington primarily with VA loans?
Yeah, the last one that I had that was so difficult was also VA. And when I've called the VA rep on this particular one, he says, "Oh, I can't do anything. It's all up to the servicer." And I was like,
So
"Oh my
that's
God,
totally
okay."
untrue. I mean, what I would say is that those are probably not reasonable practices, and we should look at whether the CFPB enforcement staff would be willing to do something. I would encourage you to submit a complaint to the CFPB consumer complaint database on behalf of your client to try to get it on their radar screen. But I can also talk to Ellie and you and Bruce about trying to bring the Carrington problem itself to the CFPB and see what they're willing to do about it.
Okay,
I
would appreciate that.
There's a whistleblower email address that they have, and I think we shared it as part of when we sent out the recording where we had the CFPB on that we couldn't record. But there is a whistleblower email where you can send trends like that. So it might be worth it to send them an email saying, "Hey, we just want to let you know that Carrington is doing this." So they don't want any personally identifiable information to be sent through that email address, but they will look at and pay attention to trends that somebody sends to them saying, we're seeing this.
Okay, that would be great. It would just be great. I dread it if I get a Carrington file, and I'm blown away when we actually get a workout. But you know, the last one that I had that lasted for 8-9 months, we filed complaints everywhere, and Carrington didn't care. In my view, in my own opinion, I think Carrington just doesn't care. And I understand these representatives are there and they're just getting their paycheck so that they can make their own mortgage payment and feed their own kids. But that's part of the problem that, to me, in this whole COVID mess, is that each person doesn't know the whole picture. They only know the little tiny scope of it, so they don't know how they're impacting people and what's going on. So if anybody has any questions about anything.
Well, we do have a bunch of questions, but before we do that, I want to just very quickly say, going back to what Rosie talked about and saying that she filed the CFPB complaint and got no response. So a couple of things that we learned on the call with CFPB is make sure that you have your third-party authorization included with your complaint, because otherwise the servicer isn't required to respond to you. They're only required to respond to the client. But if you have your third-party authorization as part of your complaint, then they do have to respond to you. And the other thing that we learned is that if you file a complaint and you can't get a response and you don't get a response, you can file a complaint about the fact that you filed a complaint and didn't get a response. So just another thing to do. And we are,
Ellie,
I want to go ahead and get to some of the questions because we're going to lose Alys pretty soon. So Kelly, is there something quick you want to say?
Yeah, just real quick. The one thing I wanted to follow up on from what Sue said about keeping going with the forbearance because it doesn't hurt anything. Like I totally understand that logic, and right now, especially where the CARES Act is so unclear as to what happens if you exit a CARES Act forbearance, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I would suggest that it would be helpful to double check credit reports and and other records to make sure that the payments that are being made do get credited properly, because what I mentioned in the beginning about the Wells Fargo case, it seems to indicate some of the payments are not actually getting processed right. So it's important to the extent that borrowers are keeping up, that they're getting full credit for that. And so that might just be something to watch for. We hadn't seen reports about that happening before, so it seems to be a little bit of a new twist. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's see what we have for questions. Melody, go ahead.
If we just had a pause there, I was just going to jump in. We just got an email from Brian Montgomery, who's second in command at HUD about certification, and it doesn't change anything, but we just got the notice. He just said, we continue to work on the issue of pending certification deadline and hope to resolve soon. Had 2 meetings on it already today. Just wanted to alert you, Brian. So we just wanted to share that quickly.
Okay. Okay, and Melody, are you still with us?
She's not.
She's not. Okay. All right. So I am going to go ahead and look through some questions really quickly here.
Ellie, this is like, I'm supposed to get off at 2:30. I can do 5 more minutes, but I have another call I need to get on, so that's all I've got.
Okay. Okay. All right. There's just this is one thing, Alys, that popped up that I would love you to respond to. One of our counselors is saying, according to a HUD call yesterday, there's no such thing as a deferral with GSE loans. If someone is behind when they got forbearance, all payments are due when the forbearance ends.
Well, I think it's much more complicated than that. There is a deferral for GSE loans, but you're only eligible for it if you were not more than 30 days late when you've got your forbearance. Right. So if you were, then you're eligible for a flex modification. And until you get the flex modification, technically the money's owed, but the theory is that they're not going to make you pay it. They're just going to say, well, let's make another arrangement, which would be the flex mod. If you don't qualify for a flex mod or you can't afford the flex mod, that's the concern that we all have about what's going to happen to those people. So the real options are go back to your regular payment or get a loan modification. And you want to try to do that before someone's in foreclosure.
Okay, and very quickly also before you're gone, somebody asked, has anyone heard about a mortgage stimulus program? I have a client that is advising me that he wants to know more about 2020 homeowner relief stimulus. The program is giving $3,252 back to homeowners.
So I have 2 things to say about that. One is lots of states and localities have programs to assist people, and lots of scammers are pretending that that's true when it isn't. So I can't answer the question of which one that is, but that's a very specific number, and that makes me worry that it's a scam.
Yeah, we haven't heard any of that at Parkview.
I would say that if anybody is hearing from a homeowner about a stimulus such as this, that you should try to get as much information as you can and see if there is actually something happening in your community that then you can also provide to your other homeowners. But that at the same time, you want to make sure that if it's a scam, you find out about it so you can report it to your state AG, and then you can also report it to the CFPB.
And make sure the person doesn't accept it.
Right.
Bad thing is they usually call us afterward.
All right. I think that is really the main question. A lot of people are talking about having similar issues to what Sue and Rosie. A lot of, yes, we have the same problems with SPS and Faye. People saying it's like 2008 all over again. Like this.
I have to go, but I just want to say that I sent a note to Ellie and Bruce saying, I think what could be really effective is for you guys to organize like a set of stories about 2 or 3 servicers demonstrating trends. You know, Carrington always does this. Here are 5 stories from different states about it. SPS always does this. Here are 6 stories about it. And then do a phone call with the enforcement staff at the CFPB who can bring cases against those companies. They won't be able to tell you what they're up to until they're done, but you could essentially hand them, you know, a lawsuit that they could investigate. I know you already don't have any free time, but that would really hugely change what's going on.
Well, this is a priority for us, so it's worth really thinking about. We did have enforcement people at the meeting with Kathy Kraninger, but this will probably be more specific. So
this would be like a working meeting with the actual staff about what you're actually seeing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Jim and Veronica may be two of the people you want to talk to over there, but I can help you with that if you don't already know them.
Yeah, no, that would be helpful, and I think this is one we could do virtually, so it's
of course
it's more manageable as an event. So, and we have we can pull off of the invite list from this call where people are speaking up about specific things. So so this might be a project for the next week or two. Got a couple of us in the hopper right now, but we do have to solve this. Good.
I'm going to hop off.
Well, thank you.
Everyone for
Thanks
having
a
me.
lot, Elise.
Thank you, Elise. So Bruce, I would like you to comment about Citi, because a couple of people mentioned they need some escalation contact at Citi.
You're kidding.
No.
Okay, well, the Citi portfolio is managed by some different servicer. It's not Citi's anymore, but let's give us the whoever's working on this, and I will pass it on. Actually, that's really interesting. We took them off the list because Citi had told us they had, and we had heard this, that they had gotten rid of their portfolios a long time ago. But I think what it is that the Citi portfolio is named that, but it's handled by different servicers, but on a contract basis, something like that, I'm guessing. But yeah, just give us the stuff, and we will take it to Citi and get them to tell us what's really going on here.
And Rosie, did you mention a homeowner that has whose mortgage is with Citi? Rosie, you're muted if you're talking. Because a couple of the people who talk about Citi are referring back to Rosie. So I'm not sure if one of the cases that Rosie talked about was with Citi. But I'll get, if I can't connect with her. If she isn't able to talk right now, I'll connect with her offline. And I think, Bruce, that, that's pretty much the main questions.
Okay.
Kelly, do you mind if I jump in for 1 second? This is Kelly again.
Absolutely not. Go for it.
Great. So I just wanted to say a couple of things. One was, I realized when I was talking earlier about the CARES Act, I probably should have made one clarification. If the consumer was current prior to the pandemic, they should be reported as current as long as they're in the accommodation and complying with the accommodation. If they were delinquent before the pandemic declaration, then their delinquency level is frozen, and it shouldn't get any worse while they're in compliance with accommodation. So I just wanted to clarify that in case it's relevant to that one case. The one other thing that I wanted to say, and I think this kind of came through in some of the things Elise said too, but to the extent that there's any way to get repayment plans figured out before the forbearance ends, it makes it will be much cleaner and much less likely to lead to questions about what's going on with credit reporting and everything else. And I know that's not totally within people's control because it depends on how servicers react and respond. But I think that's becoming increasingly clear as we talk to people, is that it's the cases where there's a forbearance and then a lapse that things will start to get more confusing and more messy. And so in case that's helpful, I wanted to mention that. The last thing really quickly was there were two things that I didn't talk about today but are in our report in case people are interested. One is talking about the potential credit reporting impacts on renters, which people are really concerned that their credit reports and scores could start to deteriorate faster than homeowners because the CARES Act doesn't provide as much protection for them. And the other thing is, the last time I was on, people had asked some questions about how some of these codes are getting reflected on consumer reports. And so we have a breakout box talking about some of the ways that that can play out and some of the reasons that consumers may not see what they expect when they first pull their credit report. And so I just wanted to flag that in case it was useful to anybody. Thank you.
Thanks. So Bruce, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, so very quickly, we will continue doing all this work, and love the fact that you all are so engaged and helping on us. If you can if your organization isn't a member and can join, this is very valuable to us. It gives us the flexibility, especially to do the lobbying work, which outside funders often do not pay for. And but it's also kind of a vote of confidence in the work we're doing. Definitely understand if it's budget crunch time for you and it's not the right time for you. And hopefully we'll be around for a while, so take advantage of that. And we have a couple of discounts, one on credit reports, the other one on Savvy, the student loan advisory program, which can be useful for your clients or your staff for that matter. But we'll continue our work. We'll continue with the calls and continue to be engaged on all these issues. And our next call is we're scheduling for, when is it? It's the 13th of August. Ellie, I don't think we have a plan yet for what the call is. Is that right?
We don't. We don't have a specific topic yet. We're looking at a couple of things, but we don't have a specific topic yet.
Okay. So to be determined, but we will do this. In the meantime, in the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a lot that happens in Congress that we are going to be deeply engaged with to try to get funding back in and hopefully addressing some of the certification questions. None of it will be easy, so we're hoping to pull it together. And secondly, we'll continue monitoring on the certification to try to move things forward. So anyways, a lot going on. Thanks for all the good work you're doing in the field. We know you have a lot going on with you as well. So take care, everybody. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Was anybody still here?
I'm still here.
I was looking for that whistleblower email address at the CFPB and from Matt Martin's contact information.
So they'll come out in email.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. This is great.
So listen, Sue, the other thing is the whistleblower, if you go to, if you just Google CFPB whistleblower, it's going to come up.
Oh, okay.
They have like a whole page on it.
Okay. I will find it then.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Yep. Bye.
Bye.